enjoy that ice cream cone, because you're at the card pool. I'm your host, Stu Galetta.
And I'm Kyle Robertson.
And today we are talking about the top 10 money cards from Lorwyn.
This is, of course, part 2 of our set review. You can check out our previous videos in which we each talked about our top 10 hidden gems that we found in this set. But without further ado, let's start this review.
Let's indeed, Kyle, and let's start off with the number 1 card for $31, Cryptic Command. Now, this instant costs 4 mana, 1 generic, and triple blue, and it's a modal card in which you can choose 2 of the 4 options. The first one being counter target spell, the second one being return target permanent to its owner's hand, the third one being tap all creatures your opponents control, and finally, draw a card. So this is the best command out of the entire command cycle, just for, again, its versatility with these modes. Having the option to choose 2 is super strong, but each one of these modes is very strong at almost any point in the game, as long as you have the mana to cast it.
I completely agree, Stu. This is absolutely the best of the commands, and also very probably, obviously, the best card in Lorwyn, and it definitely deserves this price tag. This is just a crazy, crazy card for all kinds of blue decks, because each mode on its own can probably win the game, and when you combine 2 of them, that's just insane value. Countering the key spell, obviously that's really good. Potentially drawing a card, that could get you something that indeed helps you win the game. You could also tap down all of your opponent's creatures, opening them up to some kind of crazy Alpha Strike attack, and then finally bouncing any permanent. That includes lands. That is potentially very, very big, especially if you can copy something like this.
The one part I really do like about this is the draw a card, which sounds low, but at any point in the game, it's always useful to get a card. So even though it's a very kind of almost blah effect, it's something that's almost never overlooked. But again, like you were saying, with the tap opponent's creatures, that's all opponents. It's almost like a cyclonic rift for just tapping, and again, that ruins everyone's plays. So if you go ahead and make it so that they're completely vulnerable, you can take the strike against them. So if you think of like the Locust God, who likes to draw cards to get an entire creature army out there, this is perfect for that. Go ahead, tap them all down if they're using a lot of flyers, if they have creatures with reach. All that goes away for the fact that you can now just go in, like you said, an Alpha Strike, I like that idea, and just completely hose their life. They can't do anything about it unless they have mana to kind of go against that. But again, this also has a counter spell on it. So even if they do something like this, you can still go ahead and have an option against that, potentially. Again, it depends on how the layers stack up on this. But you can have that option, which is really, really cool. But moving away from this card into a little bit of a simpler one, Kyle, where's number 2 lie?
Alright, and speaking of the most feared card in Modern, this actually might be the second most feared card in Modern, or it might be the most feared card in Modern. Depends on who you are, I guess. Number 2 on our list for the price of $19 a copy is Thoughtseize. This is a 1-mana black sorcery. Target player reveals his or her hand, you choose a non-land card from it, and that player discards that card. You then lose 2 life. Just like Cryptic Command, Thoughtseize is heavily played across all formats of Magic, and just like Cryptic Command is probably the best control spell ever created and definitely the best of the command cycle, Thoughtseize is the best discard spell ever created. This thing is really, really scary in how much potential leverage it gives you on turn 1 of the game. And as I said, very big Modern staple and pretty much played in any kind of deck that can support it.
Even if you're not into the discarding, just seeing your opponent's hand just makes it so that there's no more surprises. Just taking 7 cards out of the equation, or just knowing that you're not going to walk into some sort of easy trap, it's huge. And that's the same reason why you see a card like Ataxian Probe being played in other formats, because instead of even have to using mana, you can just pay 2 life and just flat out know what's happening. So it's a super strong card. I don't really see it too much in Commander, although you can see it in maybe some sort of discard kind of deck, like Nath or the Guiltleaf, who is quintessentially focused on making people discard. But you would see this used just to see what the hand option is. Again, little low impact in Commander just for seeing someone's hand. There's other ways around it to make it so it's a little bit more impactful. But again, useful card, better in a different format. But enough about this card, let's go on to another one that we do see in Commander. Number 3 on our list for $25 is Rings of Brighthearth. It's a 3-drop artifact. Whenever you play an activated ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 2 generic, and if you do, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for that copy. So this is a very strong card that is really strong at breaking some combos or making it so that you can just flat out win the game. You can get infinite mana from this. Now again, you're thinking you can't tap it for mana and tap 2 for it. However, on cards like Basalt Monolith, you can go ahead and make it so you get the untap effect again and tap it in response. So inherently you get more mana for just a little bit more and inherently can create infinite mana. But also this card works really well with Planeswalkers. You go ahead and you make a Planeswalker use their loyalty. Well, hey, that's an activated ability. Pay 2 more, you get it again. Granted, you won't get to pay the cost, so that means you won't get additional counters or lose additional counters, which could be good. But potentially getting 2 emblems for just an extra 2 mana, that's insane, and that value is huge.
Yeah, if you're a budget player, you see something like Illusionist Bracers and think that that's a really good card, and it is, but it's an equipment, and it can only work on creatures. Rings of Brighthearth is so great because it works with anything, and especially, like you said, Stu, it is great with Planeswalkers.
This works with lands such as Maze of Ith, because again, that's not a mana ability. Commanders that typically have a really awesome tap effect, like, I don't know, Krenko Mob Boss, or any commander that just flat out taps. This is phenomenal. Just getting 2 effects off, that means you don't have to wait for an additional turn. You inherently get the benefit that you want twice per turn, and as long as this thing sits around, and again, once this hits, people groan or they kill it instantly.
Speaking of cards that are good in the early game especially, our next card is very much that and can actually make things a nightmare very early on. Number 4 on our list for $19 is the legendary creature Garrick Teague. This is a Kithkin Advisor legend. He is a 2/2 for 2 mana and in the Selesnya colors, 1 green and 1 white. He has a couple abilities here. Non-creature spells with converted mana cost 4 or greater can't be played, and non-creature spells with X in their mana costs also can't be played. Those abilities are somewhat redundant in my opinion because normally spells with X in their mana cost when they're actually cast are probably going to be 4 or greater, so whatever, but usually if you see something like Curse of the Swine that actually gets cast for X equals like 1 or 2 sometimes, maybe something like that could slip under the radar, so that's why they're just canceling out X spells entirely. Keep in mind, though, canceling out X spells and also non-creature spells that cost 4 or more cancels out the vast majority of good cards in the game. So, for example, Cryptic Command can't be played when Garrick Teague is on the field. That's just one example. And this is actually very popular in Commander, especially more competitive versions of Commander, for just how incredibly oppressive this thing is, and it slows down the game to the point where it's really painful if you're not the player.
Oh yeah, this is Hate Bear the Commander. And I mean, there are other Hate Bears that can be commanders, but this is the best by far. And this is also really powerful because typically in Selesnya, we see the commanders that typically want to go ahead and make tokens. Rise the Redeemed, Tristani, for example. This is one of the few ones that really doesn't. And that is something that makes it so this deck can use a variety of cards to make it so that instead of having to play towards one style, you can throw in some really good stuff kind of cards and just run a deck that makes it so everyone's having a hard time playing stuff except for you.
Seriously, though, this works great with things like Leonin Arbiter, Grand Abolisher, even Mind Censor, Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. The list goes on and on and on with good cards that combo with this in some way. It's also very well played in Modern because there are entire Hate Bear type decks in Modern, and this is a key ingredient to that. And in these colors, you have all the best ones available to you. And with the exception of Swords to Plowshares and sometimes Path to Exile and Toxic Deluge, you don't really see a lot of low-costed removal in Commander especially, so this thing can prove to be actually very hard to get rid of. But speaking of cards that slow down the game like that and sort of Hate Bear type things, this is a kind of a hate artifact. Lowell, you want to talk about this one still?
Sure. At number 5 for around $17, we have Thorn of Amethyst. It costs 2 mana for an artifact, like you said, Kyle, and it reads non-creature spells cost 1 more to play. So this is a really good card to slow down the game, to make it so that pretty much everyone has to pay more. And nothing hurts more watching an opponent play this card, and then you have to go ahead and pay 2 mana for your Soul Ring. Ooh, that just burns against you, and everyone just kind of sees you do it and groans at that, and it feels bad. However, the person who plays this is probably not using a lot of non-creature spells. They're probably going heavy with all of that kind of stuff, so they're going to have an entire deck built to utilize this card to its full potential.
That is true. This is a very, very cheap and easy to play taxation method. It has great synergies with artifacts, which makes it kind of a shoo-in for artifact-based decks because they're not playing a ton of spells every turn. It also goes into almost any deck that likes to tax people for their cards, although the new dampening sphere from Dominaria might actually, in theory, be better than this card. I'm not entirely sure, but you'd have to kind of work that one out yourself. This is great in creature-based decks because it fights against non-creature based decks, and if you're playing a lot of creatures, you don't really want to be playing against Spellslinger type styles because they have the upper hand against you most of the time. Not so with this card.
Now, moving away from this artifact and into something that's a powerhouse in green. Kyle, this is your least liked color, but tell us why this is good.
Well, we are talking about creatures here, so we're going on to one of the biggest ones in this set. It's called Vigor. It costs 6 mana, 3 colorless, and 3 green for a 6/6 elemental incarnation. It also has Trample, and he has a couple other abilities too. First of all, when Vigor is put into a graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its owner's deck. And also, if damage would be dealt to a creature you control other than Vigor, prevent that damage. Put a +1/+1 counter on that creature for each 1 damage prevented in this way. You really have to kind of think for a second about how good this is, because at first it just seems kind of like, well, you know, it's okay if my creatures get blocked, they don't take damage and they get bigger. That's okay. You know, it's not great, but it's okay. But think for a second about how good this is against red decks and other kinds of cards that deal damage to creatures. This card pretty much shuts them down all by itself, and unless they just straight up kill this card first before they deal with anything else, your army is going to get really big really quickly. There are cards out there like, for example, Pyrohemia that can repeatedly deal damage to things. Pestilence is another one, although that's in black and it's a little weird, but whatever. Those kind of cards, if they're comboed with this or used against this, they can react either very well or very badly, depending on if you're the one trying to use them or not.
Yeah, it's definitely a tech call if you want to use this card, because again, it isn't going to sit in the grave, and typically a lot of decks like to have stuff in the grave just for the ability to reoccur it, but also some people use cards like this to make it so that they have an anti-mill strategy to save themselves. Something like an Eldrazi or a Blightsteel Colossus, once it hits the grave, it goes ahead and bounces back to the deck. So this way, if somebody is trying to mill you, they're going to have one heck of a time trying to get around these. You either have to play them, or they're not going to kill them for one, because once it hits the grave, it's going back to the deck. So it's a unique card for that, and it is an elemental, and elementals do have synergies, but I'm not sure if you'd really want this in an elemental deck. You could put this in pretty much any green good stuff kind of deck, and it will do its job.
Oh, and I would too, because as I mentioned, it prevents against all kinds of damage, be it combat damage or removal-based damage. And one of my very favorite red cards of all time, because red is one of my favorite colors to play, is Blasphemous Act, because it's such an overpowered, undercosted board wipe. I love this card, and it's so good.
Yeah, that's scary, because especially you could use that as a win con. You go ahead, you have a little token army, play this guy, play Blasphemous Axe, because again, it's going to be reduced because of how many creatures are out there. Pretty much get that for free, boost them all, hopefully give them trample. How would you not win the game at that point? Like, that's pretty simple.
And I've had the exact situation come up against me where I have a Blasphemous Act and I'm like, not worried about anything, I'm just going to play it as soon as things seem like the right time, and then somebody throws down this card and I'm like, no! Because it just completely ruins the whole thing. And if I play the card, I'm going to end up getting trashed by whatever other creatures they have that survived.
Now, moving away from this guy and into a card to help bring him out and onto the battlefield. Our number 7 for $14 is Guiltleaf Palace. Now, this is a land that can go ahead and tap for either black or green mana, but it also has the ability to come into play untapped if you go ahead and you reveal an elf card from your hand. So this is very good as a land because it's better than a guild gate. If you don't happen to have an elf or you're not running elves, it's the same thing as a guild gate. But if you go ahead and you're running changelings if you're not running elves, or if you are running elves, just go ahead, show one from your hand, and this thing comes into play untapped, kind of like a dual land would be if like from the old school OG alpha or beta sets. And again, this is a really good card. It's firmly in the Golgari guild. You might play this in a tricolor, but these kind of specialty check lands, and there's a whole cycle of them from this set, they pretty much stay in a dual colored, and I mean, you might not even see them just for the fact that they're all very tribal based.
Yeah, and there are a series of tribal lands like this in Lorwyn. There's one for merfolk, there's one for elementals, there's one for goblins. There's one for each of the, I think, 6 different tribal strategies available in the Lorwyn set.
Giants too, I think.
Yeah, Giants is one of them, exactly. And so you might be wondering, well, why is this card any more valuable than any of those? Why aren't they all making our list? Because one simple reason, elves are a highly played competitive tribe. There are whole elf tribal decks in Modern and Vintage and Legacy and all those other formats have tribal elves, because elves in green is just kind of a crazy strategy to be able to play. Elf ball combo, ramp out your deck, play all these creatures. It's really pretty nuts. And the reason why Guiltleaf Palace's value has actually gone through the roof compared to the other tribal lands is because relatively recently there have been some very, very good green-black elves reprinted, even outside the Lorwyn block. There was one that I can't recall the name of in Magic Origins that basically is a 3-drop that when it enters the battlefield drains your opponent's life for every elf you control, which is just crazy, crazy powerful. And as I said, that's a green-black elf. People started splashing this land because of that one card into all of their elf decks, and therefore this card's value has gone up exponentially.
Oh yeah, and it's really good. Again, like most of the time you see elves as just mono green or green white. So only in this set predominantly, and again, like the card you mentioned, very rarely outside of this kind of whole set, you don't really see a lot of green black elves or just mono black elves for that matter. So this can be a little bit niche. However, there are elf commanders that do exist. You have Glissa, you have Nath, and they're both very strong commanders. So having this in there only gives them more gas. It keeps them up to par, and they can keep going ahead.
Well, we've been talking quite a bit about mana resources in this, it seems, and we're going on to another card that goes along those very same lines. And this is one that I have played before to great effect. Number 8 on our list, for the price of $13, is Mistbind Click. This is a little bit of a mouthful to explain, so bear with me here. First of all, it is a 4-drop fairy wizard. It's a 4/4. It has flash and flying, meaning you can play it at any time you could play an instant, and it has a cost of 3 colorless and 1 blue. It also has the ability Champion a Fairy. You see the Champion ability on a bunch of different cards in Lorwyn. When this comes into play, you have to sacrifice it unless you exile another fairy you control, and when this card leaves play, the exiled creature then returns to the battlefield. And when a fairy is championed with Mistbind Click, tap all lands target player controls. This actually takes a bit to make it work, as it doesn't really see a ton of play outside of Fairy Tribal just for the champion ability alone. You have to either have a Changeling out, which again, not very many of them that are competitively viable, or you have to have another Fairy out. But honestly, it's completely worth the effort, because in the right deck, it can completely disable your opponent's turn, barring some kind of counterspell or other instant speed interaction that can shut down its ability. This, among several other cards from Lorwyn, was the terror of competitive play when it was around in Standard Age, because this, combined with some other really stupid cards like Spell Stutter Sprite and Bitter Blossom, made people's lives a living nightmare.
Oh, yeah, totally. And so one thing to note outside of that is that if you are trying to use this outside of Fairy Tribal deck and you're using some fairies or a fairy engine, we'll say, or just, a decent amount of changelings, that does happen. It's really powerful in a blink type atmosphere because, again, you're getting almost 2 enter the battlefield effects. Once this one leaves, another one enters. And if that one has an enter the battlefield or an ETB effect, then that one gets that one. So you can go ahead and just combo the one off with another. So let's say you're using something like Brago, for example, and Mistbind clicks on the field. And, just give me any example of a card, Kyle, that has a good ETB effect in blue.
I actually thought of a really good one to use with this too, Cloud of Fairies. It's an old one from the Urza's block that has a 2 cost for a 1/1 with Flying Fairy. You can also cycle it, but that's beside the point. But it was one of those spells when it comes into play, you untap lands equal to its converted mana cost, so it's basically a free 1/1 flyer. Yeah. And it's a fairy too.
That's huge synergies right there.
You don't really see this card played too much in formats like Commander, for example, because fairies don't really have that deep of a bench in terms of kind of cool tribal interactions, and there just aren't that many of them.
But this is a cool card because it's almost kind of like an inverse Seedborn Muse, obligating their lands instead of like untapping yours in that effect.
No, it's actually kind of true because this, while Seedborn Muse kind of allows you to play during other people's turns, this makes sure that other people aren't going to play during your turn, or maybe even during their own turns too, because if you play this during the upkeep, then basically you're stopping most kinds of interaction and you're tapping down all of their lands, so even if they do manage to get something off, they're not going to be able to play anything else that turn. And again, this is why when Lorwyn was in Standard, Fairy Tribal was the best possible deck you could play. It's not really that viable anymore in Modern. It used to be for a while, but there are just better cards that have been made. You could shut out entire opposing turns just by looping Mistbind Click.
But moving right along to our number 9, and this is a fairy again, so we're going to stay on this train. For $10 is Sower of Temptation. This is another 4-drop fairy wizard. It is 2 generic and double blue for a 2/2 body. And this creature has flying, but also in addition, when this creature comes into play, gain control of target creature as long as Sower of Temptations remains in play. So this is another card that would go really well with the click, just for the fact of it gets a creature while it's in play, you blink it out, get the click into play, and then they get the creature back, sure, but if you go ahead and you blink it out, you get the creature back in that you just had, the Sower, go ahead, steal something else. They might have something that's even stronger out that you want to prevent them from having, or anything else. This is almost like a mind control on a creature. Having that on a body is very powerful.
And it is, and also it's in a great tribe, like you said, not only fairy, but wizard too. And I've played different variations of wizard tribal over time, and this is one of my absolute favorite cards to use in it, just because it is that good. If you copy this ETB effect with something like the new commander, Naban, Dean of Iteration from Dominaria, or Panharmonicon, this just gets really powerful very quickly. And if you clone it too, my goodness, there's just going to be some really, really silly things going on here.
Oh, totally. Actually, you almost could view this as a clone, even though it really isn't, because you're inherently getting the creature itself from your opponent. Again, pseudo-clone, even though clone costs the same amount, it's, I don't know, you tell me, is it more mind control or more clone?
I could think it's both. I'd lean more toward mind control myself, but I guess you could see it as, taking somebody else's creature, basically, but they don't still have it, which is the nice thing. And also, I should mention that it is a bit weak because you have to protect it. It has a pretty fragile, weak body, so most damage-based spells can probably kill this thing off. You gotta make sure you protect it. You gotta save a counterspell, you to give this thing hexproof or something like that. But if you manage to do that, you can keep the creature for pretty much as long as it remains in play. So barring a board wipe, it's going to be very difficult to get that creature back.
Oh yeah, and you would also find this in a lot of control-type decks that love to steal people's permanents or creatures. And Marique Rebrit is a commander. I keep bringing it up here and there, but just for the ability to just flat out tap something and take a creature as long as it's tapped, it's almost the same idea with this card. So you would see this typically in that kind of deck, unless it's, again, in Ona, Queen of the Fae, which is, again, a fairy tribal type deck.
And again, decks like Brago, this would be a great card to have in it, because if you're looking at this card, you steal something when you first play it, and let's say something else gets played later on, and you're like, man, I wish I had saved this for that. Well, you can. Guess what? You'll have to give the old creature back, but still, you can make use of this card like that, too.
Now, finally going on to our number 10. Kyle, you're getting all the green cards today.
Yeah, I guess I am, and it's actually the only Planeswalker we'll be talking about here. It's number 10, Garrick Wildespeaker for $9. This is a green Planeswalker with 4 mana cost, 2 colorless and 2 green, and as per usual, it has 3 abilities, starting with 3 loyalty. +1, untap 2 target lands, -1, put a 3/3 green beast creature token into play. Or -4, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. This is a very basic Planeswalker card, as all the Lorwyn Planeswalkers were, because they were the first of their kind, but it's pretty good, and it probably is the best one in Lorwyn, because it covers all the bases you might want. Number 1, it gives you card advantage in the form of more mana and creature tokens. Number 2, it protects itself vis-a-vis creature tokens. And number 3, it has an ultimate that can potentially win you the game. Granted, it's not as straight-up ridiculously powerful as most Planeswalker ultimates ended up being, but still, Overrun for free is pretty good, and it can probably win you the game if you're playing green.
Well, that's only if you're in a token build. I mean, if you're doing something just big fatties, again, that effect's also good. So it can be serviceable in those kind of decks as well. But, I mean, the main thing you want here is the +1. Go ahead, untap 2 lands. Now, again, this works on you or an opponent, so you can be able to make it so that you can give them some sort of combo piece or some sort of protection piece to make it so that they're alive or you're alive. So it works in Commander, it works in Two-Headed Giant, too, so you can help your teammate out. But it's just really good, especially for the fact that it is in green, because if you look at green, typically known for the biggest, strongest card is Gaia's Cradle. Go ahead, tap Gaia's Cradle, we'll say for 3 or 4 mana. Use Garrick, bring it out. All right, go ahead, use its +1, get that mana back. Go ahead, use it on, I don't know, Temple of the False Gods, get 2 mana again. So it can really make it so you're getting more than just a typical 2 mana. Or also, again, if you're in 2 colors, you also have the bounce lands, which can go ahead and give you 2 mana as well. So this is something that can go ahead and give you a huge landslide mana advantage over your opponents.
Yeah, and worst comes to worst, look at it this way, it's a 2-mana Planeswalker, basically, because if you're playing this into a board of just normal tap for 1-mana lands, you can basically use the plus and negate half the Planeswalker's cost right there. Of course, if this were made today, I would probably give this a little bit of grief for the fact that I wish its first 2 abilities were switched. I wish it plus to create tokens and minus to untap lands.
Oh, no way. Are you kidding me? Because, I mean, yes, you get a strong creature, and actually, in fact, you get the beast from a Beast Within token right there, and to give you a comparison to that, if you destroy a permanent, Wizards deems it fair enough to give you that kind of token no matter what it is, so it gives you an idea that that's a pretty big token just to be getting for just a -1. And again, in green, you have Doubling Season. Go ahead, play Garrick, get a higher loyalty. Go ahead, get 2 Beast Within tokens like that. That's insane. So you really have a strong Planeswalker here.
Yeah, but all the other Garruk's +1 to get 3/3 tokens, so why can't this guy?
I agree with you for that, but again, remember, the mana is the key part about this card. But anyways, Carl, we're going to end that on there. This is our pool time for today, and everyone out there, if the water felt just right, be sure to check out our previous segments in which Kyle and I both talked about our own specific gems that we liked and put them into 2 separate videos.
And tell us what you think about the money cards of Lorwyn as well. What kinds of combos or decks would you use them as part of? So you can let us know in the comments down below, or reach out to us on Reddit at our handle MTGTheCardPool.
And you can also tweet it at us at MTGTheCardPool, or even throw it up on our Facebook page as you see in the link down below.
Lastly, be sure to check out our next video in which we discuss Lorwyn as a whole set and give our final ratings for what we think the quality of the set is as a whole. I'm Kyle Robertson.
And I'm Stu Galetta, and we'll see you next time at the Card Pool.